Welcome to the Mountains of Greece podcast series, which is part of the broader Mountain Stories, Mountain Futures podcast project. These interviews follow up on our recent Mountains of Greece conference held at the British School at Athens in October 2025. The goal of the project is to explore a wide range of stories from people working on different aspects of mountain heritage in Greece. It involves thinking about the past, but also thinking about the future. How can we find new ways of engaging with history, heritage and conservation in the mountain landscapes of Greece? How can we ensure a sustainable approach to environmental and cultural preservation? I'm Jason König from the University of St Andrews. It's a great pleasure to welcome Socrates Koursoumis. Socrates is an archaeologist from the Hellenic Ministry of Culture. He's excavated very widely across Greece. Particularly relevant for our conversation today is his very extensive experience of conducting archaeological survey in mountain regions, especially Mount Lykaion and Mt Taygetos, which we will be hearing more about in a moment. He also has a long-standing interest in the history and archaeology of ancient Corinth, especially in the Roman period, and with a focus, among other things, on Jewish and early Christian communities in Corinth. Welcome, Socrates. It's great to have the chance to talk to you today.
Thank you for inviting me, Jason. It's a real pleasure working with you and talking to you on mountain archaeology of Greece.
I thought we'd start just by going back to the beginning, really, and I wonder if you could start just by telling us a bit about how you came to work on the mountain regions that you're interested in. How did that arise from your earlier research? And did you have any personal interest or connection with the mountains of Greece before you came to be interested in them archaeologically?
There is a connection, actually. My mother comes from Lesbos, from a mountainous village at the west part of the island. So since my childhood, I went there on vacation. So I became well aware of the mountainous landscape, and I really enjoyed climbing mountains and walking in wild nature. So I think that this experience affected my scientific options and choices. And when I was given the chance of working on mountains, on mountain surveys or surveys at altitudes, I really took the chance and thought that it was ideal for me to do that.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there any archaeological work on those mountains in Lesbos? I haven't come across anything there.
There is actually, but mostly by amateurs. I mean, people who love archaeology and are willing to either to escort archaeologists or to supply them with information about the mountainous landscape of the island. And we don't have too many articles and papers on the finds of the mountains of Lesbos, but there are many information that wait for future archaeologists to be explored and worked and published, of course. Yes.
Great, yeah, it's exciting to hear that. I think the same is true for many mountain regions in Greece, isn't it? As we'll hear more about that in a minute anyway. So, I mean, you've got such a big range of different projects here, it's hard to know where to start. But maybe we could talk first about the work you've done on Mount Lykaion. We're going to be hearing from David Gilman Romano about the excavations there in a later recording. But I'd love to hear just a little bit about the work you've done there and how that fits into the bigger picture, I suppose the bigger picture work in Arcadia in the Peloponnese over the last couple of decades.
Arcadia actually has a very fascinating landscape, which is unique, and it is worth working on it and discovering it. A lot of work has been done in this area by the late Professor Pikoulas, and actually I was invited to assist the Greek team that works in the sanctuary by Anna Karapanagiotou, who's the director of the project. So from the very beginning, I thought that it would be a great opportunity, not just for me, but also for the team, to do some research work on the landscape. And I started walking using older descriptions and the information by locals in order to locate the pathways that lead to the summit of the sanctuary and the lower sanctuary as well, either coming from Messenia or from Arcadia. And then I had the opportunity of walking all along the valley that surrounds the summit and the sanctuary in general, and locating interesting finds that in the coming future will become part of a proper research, a proper survey.
It's amazing to hear that. It's one of the really striking things about those mountains in Arcadia, I always think, is they have this kind of intervisibility. So you can see from one mountain, you can see another, you can see right down to Messenia as well. So yeah, really interesting to hear about how you're tracing those links on the ground, as it were.
Actually, from the summit of Mount Lykaion, you can see Mt Taygetos, as well as other mountains of the Peloponnese. I would say that you can see the greatest part of the Peloponnese, even the island of Zakynthos. The view from up there is breathtaking, and you get an idea of how the big sanctuaries in antiquity operated throughout centuries, throughout time, why they were important not just for the local communities, but also for the city-states that were created from the late geometric early archaic era onwards. So I strongly believe that in order to do archaeology, the first thing that you need to do is to understand the landscape. In case you have no idea about the landscape, you cannot reach safe conclusions about your finds or your research in general. So this is the key. According to what I've seen so far and what I believe, this is the key for all researchers, to understand the landscape and to feel it, not just to access it through Google Maps or Google Earth, but to reach it, to smell it, to walk it, to feel it.
That's
and that
wonderful.
Makes a difference.
That's wonderful, yeah, and that must be right. We'll see in a minute how that principle plays out in your work on Mount Taygetos. But before we do that, I just wonder whether we could go north for a couple of minutes and look at very briefly at the work you've done.
Of course.
Also excavating the mine shafts at Laurion in Attica. I mean, obviously, the site at Laurion is not a high mountain site.
You can call it a plateau, yes.
Yeah. And the history of mining is obviously central to the history of mountains in antiquity generally. So it'd be really interesting just to hear a little about the work you've done there as well.
Thank you for asking. The thing is that I had the opportunity to collaborate with a Greek archaeologist, the late Dr. Evangelos Kakavogiannis, who was an expert in the area as he came from Lavrio. And he asked me to assist him in his survey for the mine shafts. Actually, these shafts were made by the Athenians in order to access the metals that can still be found in the underground. And thanks to this mining process, Athens became a superpower of the superpower we know of the 5th and the 4th century BC, meaning that they managed to extract silver and lead from the mines of Lavrion, and thanks to this, they managed to finance the construction of the fleet that beat the Persians in the Persian Wars. So it is extremely important for the history of Attica to understand how history was written on the landscape and not just on inscriptions or on statues and temples.
Great. It's not a site I've been to before. I don't know the details of it. But could you give us just a little bit of a glimpse of what that site is actually like today, and what are the challenges of doing the work that you did there?
Actually, there is a plateau not far away from the modern town of Lavrion, which is a port. You can easily access this plateau with your car. You can drive there. We were fortunate to locate all these mine shafts, as by that time the area was actually destroyed by a mega fire that burned the forest. So as the pine trees that are all over the area were actually burned, we could easily walk all around and find the shafts, which are not actually huge. They are narrow. They are quite dangerous, as it is not unlikely to fall in one of them. There are accidents referred of locals or of soldiers who were walking in the area and they suddenly disappeared as they fell in the shafts. The thing is that I almost fell in one of them, but fortunately I survived. So the thing is that we managed to find a lot of them, which are all over the area, even in the vicinity of the temple of Poseidon at Sunion. And you can, by seeing all this material, you can understand there are not just mine shafts, there are also galleries, of course, mining galleries. There are also furnaces in which the ore that came from the earth was burnt, and through this process the Athenians were able to distinct lead from silver. As you know, the vast majority of Athenian coins is made of silver, so there's a great abundance of material in the area, and we managed to access a great part of it. Although we focused on the mine shafts, we even got into galleries. The late Evangelos Kakavogiannis had the experience of working in one of these galleries while he was a child living there. So he knew the place very, very well, and he could guide me better than anyone else. So after that survey, we wrote together an article which was published in an archaeological journal called Archaeologiki Ephemeris, a Greek archaeological journal, and I think that it's actually a useful tool for all researchers and scholars who wish to study the area and the production of silver by the Athenian state.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that work really bringing to life that site, which is much talked about in antiquity and in modern scholarship, but usually not in a way that involves a kind of personal engagement with the site. It's fascinating to hear that. So how big is the site? If the mine shafts stretch all the way to Sunion, it's presumably quite
huge.
A large extent.
It's huge. I cannot actually give you a number, but I can tell you that as we use the old maps made by a German architect and topographer back in the 19th century, we can tell that the relics that can be related to the mining process are many, and spread all over the region, the area which is called southeastern Attica. So they start from the area of Anavissos. They are not far away from the Temple of Poseidon at Sunion. Of course, there are a lot of mine shafts on the plateau that overlooks the Lavrion town. There are furnaces or infrastructure which was used for the washing and cleaning of the ore, not far away from the modern town. Unfortunately, I cannot give you a number. If one examines the maps that were produced by von Kaupert, you will realize the extent of this operation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, let's fly back down to the Peloponnese now and back to Mount Taygetos, if you're willing. I just wonder if you could give us a kind of introduction to Mount Taygetos and to the range of projects you've worked on there, and then maybe we'll zoom in on one or two examples.
When I was sent to Kalamata to work for the archaeological service for the Ministry of Culture after Olympia, I was quite disappointed because although I expected to work on the field, I realized that a great part of our work is merely bureaucratic. So in the early days of my career as an archaeologist, I got a call from the late Professor Yannis Sakelarakis, who was one of my teachers back in my youth. And when I told him that I was very, very disappointed, he asked me, can you name a place which was visited by early archaeologists, referred in written sources, and it is difficult to access? And I said, yes, there's a sanctuary on the Messenian Taygetos, which is very hard to access. And it was actually described by archaeologists of the 19th and the early 20th century. And he said, you should go there. And I did so. And that's how I started working on Taygetos. After that, I had the pleasure of taking part in a carnival festival that is held every Ash Monday in the villages of the area, thanks to a friend of mine, Antonis Kazakos. And I realized that there was a strong and well-rooted pagan tradition in the area, as those festivals are almost similar or even identical to ancient rituals. They are only a small part of it can be described as Christians. So I realized that there were many opportunities in the area, and as I had already met many locals, I got a lot of information about antiquities in the area and started visiting those areas as an archaeologist of the local ephoria, of the local Ephorate. And then I focused on the sanctuary of Artemis Limnatis, which is on a mountain valley at an altitude of approximately 900 meters above sea level at the Messenian part of Taygetos. And then I realized that this sanctuary, or what remains from this sanctuary, can be associated with other finds of the early days of archaeology that by that time were not well described, although there were papers and articles on them. We didn't have a clear picture of them by that time, so I invited my friends. While we were working for the re-exhibition of the Museum of Kalamata, a friend of mine came with a picture of a boundary stone from Taygetos, and I asked him, where did you find this? And he said, our photographer is a climber, and it's his picture. And I asked him, and I told him, can you tell him to take us there? And he said, yes. A few weeks later, we climbed up the mountain.
Wow. Amazing. And that then turned into a bigger project on the boundary stones up on the summit,
yes.
Summit Ridge. How long were you working on that project? How many of these things did you find?
Actually, since 2007. So it's
Okay.
almost 18 years. Oh, more than 18 years, almost 19 years.
Yeah.
I started working on the sanctuary, and thanks to the British School at Athens, I got a bursary, and I visited the University of Nottingham for a while. And I had the opportunity of working along with Bill Cavanaugh, Steve Hodkinson, and James Roy. And after that, I was invited at the school, and I gave a lecture on it. And I decided that it was worth writing an article. And I did that, and it was published in the annual of the BSA. And at the same time, I was working on the boundary stones along with my friend and colleague, Socrates Koursoumis. And thanks to a fund through the school, we managed to climb the mountain many times and walk along the ridge line of the central part of Taygetos, and not just the ridge line, also the gorges, in order to locate whatever we could concerning our goal, which was a new mapping of the area.
Yep, great. Okay. And just to give some context for people who maybe are not familiar with this material, it's not uncommon, is it, in antiquity to find boundary stones in mountain regions, on mountain ridges. There are other examples too. This is separating two different territories. That's what are the boundary stones for, basically?
Actually, there is a decree that was issued by the authorities of the Roman province of Achaia in the years of Vespasian, that is 78 AD, which describes in detail the delimitation of two regions, the two major regions of southern Peloponnese, the Messenian and the Laconian, the Spartan or Laconian, okay, and the boundary between those two regions and the so-called Free Laconian League, which was created by the Romans and lies to the south of Messenia and Laconia, more or less. So through this inscription, we get a very nice picture of the region in early Roman times. And of course, we can further document the descriptions given by Pausanias, by Strabo about the area.
It's really fascinating to see that the kind of precedent for modern boundary setting, because obviously there are a lot of examples in modern nation states divided by boundary lines running along ridges. So it's amazing to see that practice traced back to antiquity. And so how many boundary stones have you found up there?
Okay, actually we found 5 of them.
Okay, wow.
Along a ridge line which is called Paximadi.
Yeah.
Paximadi is the southern part of the ridge line of the so-called central Taygetos. Taygetos is a mountain range, okay, starting from the southeastern part of Arcadia, ending at the Tenaro Cape. So the central part was called by the ancient authors the Theliatis. That was a region which was claimed by both the Spartans, Laconians, and Messenians. There is a long story concerning dispute over the area, and another thing is that this dispute is closely related to the so-called sanctuary of Artemis Limnatis, which was actually the main sanctuary in the area and one of the most prominent sanctuaries in southern Peloponnese, that originally became a part of Laconia, and then after Messenia was founded, the Messenians claimed the territory and the sanctuary as well. And there was a dispute that lasted for centuries until the Romans decided that it was necessary to put an end to this dispute and delimit the areas so that no further dispute or battles, even battles, would take place in the area. And they did that by engraving letters on the natural bedrock, creating boundary stones that are thoroughly described in this inscription that was found in Messenia, describes a delimitation, which is mostly refers to the pastoral life in the area, meaning that all these pathways were accessed by shepherds, okay, or by travelers or by armies, but mostly by shepherds. And we know that, and we can tell that for sure, as we have a description given by Ludwig Ross after the foundation of the Greek state, that the shepherds of the early 19th century destroyed the ancient boundary stones that they found along the ridge line, as they were very much afraid that due to the distinction of areas, due to the limitation of regions, Messenia and Laconia in the early years of the modern Greek state, they would not be allowed to travel from one place to the other because of these ancient boundary stones that bore letters referring, the letter M, the Greek letter mu, standing for Messenia, and the letter Lambda standing for Laconia or Lacedaemon. So there are recent examples of how these boundary marks were interpreted by the locals.
Fantastic. It's hard to convey to somebody who doesn't know the mountain. It's hard to convey what a huge task it is to do archaeology there. It is a huge mountain,
Yes.
isn't it? I don't know how long it is. Is it 50 miles long from beginning to end, or more or less from north to south? But not only that, but it's very complex topography. It's hard to even to get an understanding of one small part of the mountain, let alone a kind of overarching view of the whole thing. But I love the way the work you're doing is helping us to reconstruct life on and around the mountain in antiquity. I mean, ancient historians are quite used to talking about Sparta, the history of Sparta,
Yeah.
but the history of the mountain region more broadly is quite invisible still, isn't it?
Yes. 3 years ago, Steve Hodgkinson invited me to take part in one of his conferences, which is on Sparta and archaeology. I mean, the topic has that name. And I was asked to write something about the presence of Sparta in the region of the Taygetos. So I wrote an article, a paper, on the Spartan presence in the Taygetos, and it is fascinating how the Spartan occupation of the area changed the idea of what the mountain was before the Spartans, meaning that it was a no man's land, actually. And as Sparta was expanding all over the Peloponnese, it was gradually Laconized and became an integral part of the Laconian territory. And we've got references in our written sources, in the ancient written sources, that document this new identity for the mountain, for the region. And I think that it is more or less evident of how the so-called polis state created a territory that surrounded it, and how this territory, which gradually received the identity of the polis, and how this identity was assimilated by the locals, and how it was expressed, and how difficult it was throughout centuries to change this idea. Even modern villages of the area, let's say the mid-20th century, had a strong idea about Sparta and the relations of the area with Sparta. And they called themselves Maniates, meaning people of money, although they are closer to Kalamata.
Yeah, really interesting to see some of these continuities as well between ancient and modern, which you mentioned earlier in relation to the Ash Monday celebrations that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I know you've done some work also on Denthis wine and its cultivation in Dentheliatis in antiquity and in the present. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks to another conference which focused on the agricultural life in Greek antiquity, I thought that it would be a great idea to cast light on the so-called Denthis wine, which is actually one of the most prominent wines in Greek antiquity, referred by Alkman as well as by Athenius in his Dipnos office. So it seems that apart from the written sources, there is a tradition, there was a wine tradition, still exists. The thing, Jason, is that when you visit remote areas such as Messenia Taygetos, you realize that life remained unchanged until recently. My notion of about the area is that life and means and customs remain almost unaltered until recently. Modern highways and roads actually changed the character of the area. But before that, and we know that from other sources as well, people used to live there as they were living in antiquity. And that is extremely fascinating. And the oral tradition, the customs, everything allude to early beliefs. So Denthis wine is not just a reference in texts, it's something beyond that. There is still a viniculture in the area, There is a variety. Actually, I'm part of another project funded by Captain Vasilis and Carmen Konstantakopoulos institution, which is trying to illuminate the early production of wine in Messenia. And it seems that we need to research more and do some further analysis on this, that there are varieties which are unique. And we can tell that from the way the Denthis wine is described by Alkman and modern descriptions we have about the modern wine, there is a chance that one of these varieties is actually the so-called Denthis. And I think that we will come up to very interesting results and conclusions in this project, which is ongoing. And I think that in the coming years, 2 or 3 years, we will be able to say more about this topic.
Amazing. Thank you. That's a really nice little case study of those connections, the continuities between ancient and modern. What would you say are the challenges of doing mountain archaeology in your experience? But also what opportunities, what priorities do you see for more archaeological work in the mountain regions of Greece and particularly in Mt Taygetos in the future?
Okay, number one challenge is to remain safe when you do that. I mean, you should not do this on your own. You need to have a plan. You need to have people, to have friends from the area that are willing to assist you and help you in case of emergency. You need to be assisted by colleagues who are willing to do this because it's quite tiring. It's quite risky sometimes. For instance, when we were up on Taygetos, on the ridge line, once upon a time, we felt that a storm was coming. So you need to know what to do. Apart from this, I think that one of the challenges is to protect the mountain. All this work that we do, it's not just for our own career and our own fame, it's also for the people. By locating antiquities, you can help people remain there, let's say by creating sites or places of interest for travelers, for hikers. The locals will probably profit from this process. And they will remain there. They will keep on cultivating their fields. They will maintain their herds. They will be present in their panigyria, in their festivals. And what I'm saying is that mountains are important when people are there, people who respect the environment. They do not violate the balance of the environment. And they also protect it in cases of emergency, such as fires. If there is no people, a fire can easily destroy an area, so people protect it. And I'm saying that mostly people benefit from our work, and I'm extremely happy that they have welcomed me and they consider my presence as something which is not hostile to them, but help them get along with obstacles, help them promote their place, their villages. After all these years, I feel part of Taygetos. I mean, I think that's why I'm there when they have festivals, not just on vacations. I mean, when people live their everyday life.
Yeah, so it's partly thinking about archaeology as actually a really powerful tool of cultural preservation in the context where a lot of mountain populations are under pressure, aren't they? Pressures of depopulation, for example. Mm-hmm. That's really inspiring to hear that. Well, thank you, Socrates. You've given us an amazing glimpse of what it's like actually to do archaeology in these really challenging places, but also a fantastic glimpse of the ancient history of Taygetos and connections with the current communities of the mountain today. I went to that sanctuary of Artemis Nimnatis quite a long time ago now, maybe 10 or 12 years ago now. I remember I dragged my children along there with a copy of your article in my pocket, trying to find my way. I think we got lost at one point and went in the wrong direction. But I hadn't suspected at the time that we'd be having this conversation now. So it's been a great pleasure to talk about this with you today. So thank you.
I thank you, Jason. It was a real pleasure for me talking to you. I'm extremely grateful to you for promoting this tremendous work done on mountains all over Greece. And I think that the conference that you organized was an extremely good and powerful start for all those people who wish to protect more effectively the Greek mountains. I thank you.
Thank you. It's good to hear that. Thanks to Socrates, thanks to Zofia Gertin for editing. We've got more episodes coming up, exploring mountain heritage in Greece from a whole range of other perspectives. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share our podcast with others. Have a look at our other episodes. You can follow us on social media or get in touch directly via the Mountains of Greece project website. You might like also to have a look at the separate website for the broader Mountain Stories, Mountain Futures project that this series is a part of. You can follow the links to both of those in the episode notes. Thank you for listening.